Okay, thank you, Lucas. And first of all, let me thank the small army of organisers who've organised this event. I really admire your work, and I admire the way you do it. So thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And in beginning, I want to say a little about my title. By sensible, I want to conjure up two ideas. Sensible in the sense of not ridiculous, and I recognise that this is radically relative. What is sensible in Amsterdam may seem ridiculous in Jakarta, for example. And the second idea I want to conjure up is more complex. I want to think about sensible social properties of humans and non-humans working together in collectives. Sensible social properties like gestures, words, imaged forms, odours, proximity, tactile qualities, oral forms. So these are sensible social forms, and they emerge in collectives of humans and non-humans. And in foregrounding this idea of sensible social properties, I want to differentiate imaginary from imagination. Imaginary is what emerges and clots in that collective working through sensible social properties. And so the difference is in the suffixes, and the suffixes call up different verbs that are incorporated into those words. The "ari" in imaginary is about affordances, manifesting, instantiation. The "ation" in imagination is about results, products, and outcomes. So it's the imaginary, the collective manifestation. So I want a sensible imaginary for framing, analyses, generative for collective action. As capitalism implodes, aided and abetted in its self-destruction through excess by what I call the governance state. In a governance state like Australia, sovereignty is outsourced to the business and the NGO industrial complex. Governance is rendered there through capitalisation. We need a sensible imaginary to be able to work in that, because we must, and here we are. In this place, we're working through it, but we also need a sensible imaginary to be able to make another way, imagine other ways of doing things together. So, I'm going to tell two stories. I'm going to represent two stories. And the first story is a video, and there's a sense in which it presents itself. And the second story, I'll make the words in association with images that I've assembled from public sources. Now, these are images that I've assembled from exhibitions that have been made by exhibitions in museums that have been made by a particular group of Indigenous people. And I take just these publicly available images because they are the ones that have been authorised by the people who own these images and what these images represent, and own them in an existential sense, not in a sense of property. So there's a sense, I'm just borrowing the images. as anybody who engages with these public images. It's a bit risky to do this, to be quite honest, risky in several ways. So the first story, I will qualify. The story will emerge in the video, just a banal video, and I'll qualify it by naming what I think is not named in the video. And I'll situate the story in the contemporary Australian polity. And the second story, of course, will be a partial retelling, both limited and interested. And the book that you see imaged there is a book that I was directed to read by the people when I was beginning to work in northeast Arnhem Land, and I had entered the community as the lecturer of a young man who had been identified by the community as the first local person who would become the school principal. And I was a lecturer at a distance university, and this man was allocated to me as my student. I taught him mathematics education and philosophy of mathematics and science. And I was extremely fortunate. The community realised that because they valued this man, who would become the school principal, and they valued his education, they realised that it was a good idea to actually invest some time and effort in educating me properly. And as a start of doing that, I was directed to read this book, which was assembled by an anthropologist in the 1950s from a story told by a highly respected man. So I'll just introduce the main story for that. Okay, so in juxtaposing the stories, or juxtaposing these two stories, representing them, I'm actually contriving a sameness. Now, for many people, it would be a rather... it's a sameness that in some senses offends. On the one hand, we have a banal, rather stupid video, and on the other we have a profound story that has metaphysical connotations for a people. So there's a sense in which there's something offensive about juxtaposing these. And I'm doing this respectfully. I'm taking a story which is at the core of the metaphysical life of a people, juxtaposing it with something that's trivial, banal, and totally secular. I'm doing this respectfully, and one of the reasons I do it, and in a way take this risk, is because I think the times demand it. The Yolngu people who have, in a way, generously elaborated this story that I'll tell in very, very briefly, have done so in offering a resource to humanity. And if we ever need resources, I think this is the time. So I do it respectfully, and I value the inspiration that comes from taking this profound story about the arrival of the Yolngu in Yallingborough. Okay, so let me play the the video, which is my first story. The video was, I'll just play it and then I'll tell the story of it.
First here. Hey, what do you reckon? Brakke spot. Fire up the barbie.
Anyone else coming?
Oh, a beautiful spot like this, it'll be packed before you know it. Oh, here we go.
Did you organise the chips and dips?
Yeah.
Great spot.
Oh, thank you.
How long have you guys been here?
Since forever, mate.
Hey, where are you all from? We, sir, are from Great Britannia. We are the first fleet.
Yeah, not quite, mate.
Bonjour. Oh, my God, it's the French.
Homage.
It's the Germans. Whoa, at least they brought their own.
Who's bringing the ice?
How many bags do we need, Dougie? Keep shipping shackles, it's gonna be big! Oh, fiddlestick!
My charge rod. Oh, where'd you get those? This week.
What's this? The 16th First Fleet.
Oi, it's the Italians, the Greeks and Serbians?
Hey, mate, do you know where the backyard is?
We're about 4,000 k's of it out here. Need a wicket?
Trust me, we need one of these around 2 a.m. Chili sauce? You did remember to let the neighbours know, right?
Yeah. So it's barbecue, eh, bro? Hey,
Hey, where should we put the chili bin?
I couldn't keep them away.
Should we crack a vegan joke?
It's not a party without ice! Oh, fiddlestick!
Hey guys, what's the occasion?
Do we need one?
Look, it's the boat people!
Hang on. Aren't we all boat people?
And you're welcome.
What is that? Look, it's the boat people!
Hi, guys.
Thanks for having us, guys. Great spot for a barbecue.
Best in the world.
Yeah. So Australia Day is the 26th of January, and this was made by the Australian Meat and Livestock Commission for Australia Day this year. So what's really funny about this video is that it was made by the Australian Meat and Livestock Commission. It's like the meat board. Now, I suppose the Netherlands has a cheese board, and I don't mean the platter that you serve the cheese on. So this is the commission that, in a way, is a commission. It's a quango, a quasi-autonomous, non-government government organisation. So Australia has probably more commissions than most democracies. Much of the administration of Australia proceeds through by commission, through commissions. The meat board, as it used to be called, is a very early version of this form of what we now call governance. I can't imagine that in most places a meat board, which in a way is an extra parliamentary form of representation for a particular sector of Australia, in other words, the livestock producers, those primary producers who have historically been really, really important in Australia. Now, most countries don't know their first capitalists, but these are Australia's two first capitalists. And we know that they're actually rather famous in Australia because they are the founding capitalists. How did they get to be the founding capitalists, and how do we know so clearly? Well, of course, as you saw in the video, the Dutch were the first Europeans to arrive in Australia, really in the form of the VOC, the United East India Company. But the VOC was rather hard-headed and looked around and saw that there was nothing to sell and sailed away back to Macassar. But the British had other reasons for colonising, they did allow settlement, but settlers were actually banned from trading apart from within the settlement. The colony was a monopoly held by the English East India Company. Now, the MacArthurs broke the embargo. They imported Spanish merinos from the VOC in South Africa and raised wool, and then they, using an American ship, they shipped a very large clip of wool to Europe during the Napoleonic Wars and very nicely capitalised on the investments they'd made in Australia. So what I want to qualify that slightly ridiculous video in which the Meat and Livestock Commission, a commission of governance in Australia, has probably the most famous Aboriginal Australian, Cathy Freeman, ask, so what's the occasion? And her friend, a very, very famous Australian footballer, answer, do we need one? In other words, do we need an Australia Day? This is a very funny thing, you might think, for a commission of governance to be suggesting, and in fact it was rather controversial, as you might expect. So why is the Meat and Livestock Commission making such a video? I think we can see here, we can see it as an expression of the governance state. The Meat and Livestock Commission is in the business of ensuring good conditions in which lamb chops sell very well. And these are conditions, this video presumably is what they imagine will promote the sale of lamb chops, not because everybody agrees with them, but it's a vision of Australia. So in a way, the video is a tribute to the political clout of the lamb chop. So my next story seems very different, and it is very different. And what I want to foreground in the videos is really just the superficial form embedded in the stories. What I'm doing is contriving a sameness. I'm contriving a sameness. As I get on with the story, you'll see that this too is a story of arrival. It's the arrival of beings who perhaps are a bit hungry and set about getting a feed for themselves. So in a very surface way, there's a form that these stories hold in common. On the one hand, it's humans arriving. On the others, it's non-humans in human-like form arriving. And both stories are explicit about arrival. But and arrival, stories of arrival. So the sameness, however, that contrived sameness of my juxtaposition exists within a difference. And the difference is profound. And so as I move to the second story, my demeanour must change. And here I'm a representer. I'm only partially authorised to tell the story that I tell here. And so I tell it with respect, and I acknowledge, and in this I'm following a suggestion of those who own this story and the places the stories conjure up, that whenever it's told, it connects to the first people of a place. So I don't know the first people of this place. There were first people, and this collective being that we have here inside this place as a capitalised present, capitalised in part through the active work of the VOC, of course, but the sensible work of those first people is still here. And so there's a sense in which telling this story remembers that history stays in place. And so this is more or less a requirement that one has to remind people of the first peoples and the techniques by which the places that we are still in are still present. Okay, so this is the book I was directed to read, a book by an anthropologist, Ronald Berndt, in the 1950s, and he translated a story told by this man, Mawelan Marika, and I'm quite friendly with Mawelan's daughter, and she tells of taking food and drink down to the tent where Mawelan was telling his story, and as she puts it, he was telling his story for Berndt's tape recorder. He wasn't telling it for Berndt, he was telling it for Berndt's tape recorder, because the tape recorder would make it available to other people. Also, we see here his carvings of two of these figures, the Yolngu sisters. The Yolngu were actually three. There was a brother and these two sisters, an older sister and a much younger sister, and there was a fourth person too, and these four human-like, non-human, spiritual ancestor beings arrived in a canoe, okay, so all the images I've taken are from pieces that are in museums or from ceremonies that were conducted in association with exhibitions in museums. So this is a launching of the Yolngu exhibition in 2009 in the Darwin Museum. And Yolngu is the place where the Yolngu landed, and they're holding the sacred walking stick of the Yolngu is my adopting sister, Yalme Marika, with her cousin, in our terms, the son of Mawalan. And they are covered in white clay because this is a ceremony in which the separations between the secular world and the eternal world are dissolved through the work of ceremony, and it's very dangerous because many beings, not all of them with good intentions to humans, inhabit, so one always smears oneself with clay so you can't, your odour does not reach these beings who may well do you harm. So just to locate you where we are, this is a rather bad map. So we're in the Northern Territory, in northeast Arnhem Land. Arnhem Land is the Arnhem of Holland, named from a boat that sailed past and mapped a fragment of this coastline in the 1600s. And you see there the map of the particular peninsula. So these are the world-making beings who arrive in this coastline to make and bring it to life. And this is Mawalan's image of the canoe in which they're travelling. So here Mawalan is representing various aspects associated with this arrival of these four people. You only see two in the boat, but and when they arrived at Yolngu, they brought many things with them. For that they had previously been living on an island called Brakke, and there they'd made many ceremonies, and the brother and sister had an incestuous relationship, and many children, sets of children were born. And these were non-humans, so they were allowed to, they didn't have the rules of brother and sister avoidance, which is very strict in Yolngu, contemporary Yolngu life. And they did a lot of work on this island, both producing all these humans as children, inventing their languages, inventing their ceremonies, inventing all the institutions, and they packed all these things into the canoe and set off. And so these are the ceremonial objects that featured very strongly in this 2009 exhibition in Darwin. The sacred walking stick, the bag, these are woven bags, and the mat. Now, there were many bags, and the people were in the bags with their languages and in the mats. And so these humans are, if you like, the externalized outcomes of the collective life of these spirit beings that arrived. And when they arrived in Yolngu, what they did was set off with all these dilly bags and mats containing the people, and in various places put them down so that the land was made. People, places, their languages, their institutions, their ceremonies, and the land itself, the place itself, came into being all at once, in a moment of. And each clan was made with its land and of that land. So the core ontological commitment of being Yolngu is this notion of people-place. And each people-place is unique and particular and whole, and must stay true to itself. And it owns, in an existential sense, its intellectual resources, which is a whole set of analytic concepts which are enacted in politics and through ceremony. Okay, so this is a very different sort of story, whereas the first story is about, if you like, the arrival of capitalism and the possibility of capitalising. This story is about the arrival of uniqueness, and of course each of these unique peoples are related. So it's the uniqueness and the relatedness that arrives in this story. Okay, now I'm going to make an experiment now, and I haven't got very much time, and I'm going to try to help you feel this relatedness through language. Okay, so it's magical in the video. Everybody's speaking English. Even the Dutch are speaking English. So they spoke English then too. And of course, this is not the way it is. However, I want to point out something linguistic. Okay, now it's really stupid to try to do a linguistic experiment in a talk like this, but I'm going to have a go. These are simple English sentences. And what I've made yellow, if you like, the entity that is designated in these simple sentences. The cat sat on the mat. The cat is a spatiotemporal entity, a lump of matter separated in space-time. Okay? two cats, two lumps of matter, or the dog, or even the water. Now, the water is a bit tricky in English because it doesn't separate readily into separated bits of space and time. But the point about this is that when it's an entity like this, it can be capitalized. Okay, so I'm not making an argument for linguistic determinism here. I'm just pointing out the way these things go together. Okay, so in an ethos, in a sensible imaginary that is largely perpetrated in Indo-European languages, which all share this designating characteristic, you find capitalization as a very common form of governance. Okay, now. How does Yolngu language goes? It goes as relatedness. So these are actually collected sentences in a language called Jappo, and they're not quite as simple as the cat sat on the mat, but they are still pretty simple sentences. Yolngu Mata is not usually written in this way, but I've put a hyphen between the suffix, and the suffix names a relation, and the entity that's related. When what's designated in Yolngu language, and actually probably in all Aboriginal Australian languages, is a relation. So the first sentence, Ngarishtu nama wayan, is Ngarish the location of the action. Okay, so tu is the location of the action. Okay, you can probably guess the second one. Ngarish sees the animal, sees the kangaroo, for example, or sees the animal. Narich is the location of the action. You can probably guess the second one, Waingu nama Narich, the animal as the location of the action sees Narich. In the next sentences, there are two. Galilil Wiripumal, and this is naming the action as purposive, and so lil is like crossing over, and mal is purposefully crossing over. So every sentence is the subject of every sentence has a suffix, and the suffix says how what this sentence is about relates to something else in this sentence. So can you imagine living through a language which names relations? That's all it does. It names relations. And what I'm suggesting is that you can do this in English, of course. There's nothing linguistically determinist about this. But you can't actually capitalise in a world that is named as sets of relations. So what I want is a sensible imaginary that learns to name things using English and Indo-European languages and any language as sets of relations. So If you've got it, you should be able to listen to the Yolngu spoken, and if you listen carefully, you will hear names in English and you will hear the suffix. So I'm going to play, in concluding, a little bit of the Australian National News read in Yolngu.
On the ABC News, Yolngu for Monday, 13th of February 2017, Ngarang Bulay. Don yang ngurong undawo, wurong umaray marit man, German boy, wunya yungole. Wilfred Thor, winning 76 years old, Camille Nango, Gisla, 73 years old. Rambang imara kanina, Trifina good on Friday ja, balamara wunya yuna. Kayakan wal Yolngu margi, unang umaray bingring. Perpurin bleachman ga ranging malaka, larum madang, helicopter, abang umarang. Northern Territory Police ja kabichan wangangunye weekend ja Mritter Gormer 41 degrees. Alice Springs Watch Commander Dave Hamlin ja pichan gawanga mar gomrudal tual malakmrangunye mratu walngan malakmram. Belibang umraki mirichin mrangangum galki. Officer Hamlin ja pichar wangan yak.
You might have heard it there. It was clearest there. Okay. Maybe the experiment didn't work. But I'm pleased to have been able to let you hear the Yolngu news. It was about German tourists lost in Alice Springs when the temperature was 41 degrees. So in concluding, I want us in finding a sensible imaginary, another place to stand other than capitalisation, other than in the modern world that names spatiotemporal separated entities which are capitalised so easily, to cultivate a world within which we name routinely relatednesses, and that we begin in difference and think about the connections, think about the samenesses that are generative within those differences, and cultivate a habit of appalment and puzzlement and horror that we see on these faces. Thank you.